Welcome, my friends. I'm your host, Nyx, and this is Whispers and Warnings, a podcast where true crime, the paranormal, and magic intertwine. Together, we'll explore the stories that blur the line between the living and the lost. So light a candle, glance over your shoulder, and let's begin. Hello, hi friends. Very big apologies to the few regular listeners that I have acquired for this episode being late this week. I was trying something new as far as notation and scripting goes, and I tried to record the other day. Wasn't happy with how it turned out. Said I was going to re-record it and then just got busy the next couple of days. So better late than never this week. But on that note, this week's episode is going to be all about air travel. So in today's Witchy Business segment, we will be talking about modern travel magic. If you know me in real life, you know that I am absolutely terrified of flying. It encompasses all of the things that I hate in one activity. You are high above the ground, you're in a confined space, you're surrounded by other people. It's just a germ factory. It's all of the things that cause my OCD brain, and this is actual OCD, not just me saying that, but that cause my OCD brain to just go into overdrive. So flying is something that I try to avoid at all costs. But one way you can help alleviate some anxiety if you are someone who is very anxious like me when flying, or just in any other activity, is by creating and drawing a temporary sigil on yourself. And I won't say that real magic is like the magic in the movies. I can't just snap my fingers or wiggle my nose and suddenly I'm no longer afraid of flying and I think it's the best thing ever and I no longer have the anxiety. I really wish it were that way. I would do that 1,000 times over, but something that you can do with a sigil is draw it on yourself and use that as a reminder of the affirmation that you created with it and kind of just help balance your thoughts, balance your brain, and rationalize the anxiety to yourself. So I took a workshop about a year ago on how to create sigils yourself. It's very easy. It's one of those things that can't really be done wrong, but it feels like it can. So I'm going to give you guys a little walkthrough of it. So you're going to start with some sort of I am phrase. You're going to write this phrase down. You're going to want a pen and paper because you're going to have to do some scratching out and some recreating. So you're going to want a pen and paper or pencil and paper or whatever your preferred writing implement is. And you're going to write down an I am statement. So for instance, if we're going to be using this in air travel, you could write something like I am calm, I am safe, I am grounded. You're going to write that down. You're going to get rid of all of the vowels and repeat letters. And then you're going to take whatever's left and you're going to create an abstract symbol out of that. This is where you can get creative with it. Again, there's no wrong way to do this. You're taking your intention, you're taking this statement and creating this symbol. So you can look up some examples of sigils online. I personally don't take any other sigils that I see online or that someone else has created and use them myself because even if they say, and this, I mean, maybe this whole thing sounds a little crazy to you, but even if they say, oh, I wrote this sigil, I made this sigil with the intention of getting over anxiety or the intention of having a happier mindset or whatever they say the meaning is, you don't know if that's the meaning they actually put into it. Sure, you could put that as your own intention to it, but I think it's better to just make your own so you know the intention that went behind it. So once you create the symbol, you can use the curved lines from the letters, straight lines, crossed lines. You can draw them however you want. You're going to make this symbol and you're going to draw it on either yourself. You could use a marker, you could use makeup, you could draw it somewhere subtly, the inside of your wrist or something, just so you can keep track of it. You can take a look at it and remind yourself of why it's there. Or you can even write it on a piece of paper, stick it in your wallet, or stick it in the back of your phone case or something, just so you have it there with you. And that it's still a temporary sigil, but it's a little bit more permanent in the sense that it's not going to wash off in the shower until you take that piece of paper and get rid of it. So that is one thing that you can do to ground yourself a little bit more and kind of just put a little bit of magic in your daily life and remind yourself that even though you may be in a condition that you are anxious about and you are afraid of, you are still safe and you can still be grounded in that space. Now, this is going to lead us into tonight's dark deeds, the D.B. Cooper case. This is someone who definitely did not have anxiety about flying and air travel. On November 24th, 1971, so shortly after our last culprit, John List, had vanished after killing his whole family, Northwest Orient's Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle took off. On that plane was a man in his mid-40s. He had a calm demeanor, a dark suit, and sunglasses, and overall just blended in pretty well to the crowd. During the flight, he handed one of the flight attendants a note claiming that he had a bomb and showing what looked like dynamite in a suitcase. He demanded $200,000 in cash, which would be almost $1.6 million today, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane for another trip. So the plane gets to Seattle. The people on the plane, the crew, radio down about the demands, and the people on the ground decide to meet these demands. While they're collecting all of these items, the plane is just circling around Seattle. It circles in the air for about 2 hours while the ransom's collected, and the passengers were told that there's a small mechanical issue, so no panic ensued on the plane, which to me that's one of the craziest parts of this story, because if I were stuck in a plane, that's a relatively short flight from Portland to Seattle. If I were stuck on the plane for 2 additional hours just circling around in the air, A, I would be so airsick, and B, I would be concerned if they said the plane couldn't land because of a mechanical issue, but maybe that's just me. But either way, the passengers are fine, the plane lands, and Cooper exchanges the 36 passengers that were on board for the money and the parachute, and he keeps 4 crew members on board. He then forces the plane back up and tells them to head towards Mexico City and to fly pretty low to stay around 10,000 feet and leave the rear stairwell down. So the flight from Seattle to Mexico City would be a considerably longer flight, but shortly after that, around 8 p.m., he jumped from the plane into a stormy night over southwestern Washington. So my question to that is, why tell them to head all the way to Mexico City? Was the original plan to get off in Mexico, but then he had to jump early for some reason? Or was the plan to just kind of get them off the track and defer them and tell them to go to Mexico, but then suddenly jump out of the plane over the area that he was originally supposed to? We'll never know. They launch a massive manhunt to find him. They never find Cooper, his parachute, or any conclusive trace of evidence. And then 8 years later, in 1980, a boy finds $5,800 in decaying $20 bills buried along the Columbia River, which is near Vancouver, Washington, and it was confirmed to be part of the ransom. So at this point, there's still no trace. He still has not been found. And by this point, I mean 1980 and today. The case was officially closed by the FBI in 2016. There were a lot of different theories over the years. One of those theories that I mentioned in the last episode being that it was John List. He had disappeared shortly before this happened. He was considered to be a man with nothing to live for, on the run, and he kind of fit the description of D.B. Cooper. But he was later ruled out as a suspect by the FBI long before he was arrested, and after he was arrested, he was questioned about it and denied it, and there was no further investigation done into that. And so the different theories over time are that he didn't survive. He just simply did not survive the jump. I kept seeing reports saying he wasn't an experienced jumper, which I don't know how we would know that since we never figured out his identity. He could have been an expert skydiver, But even if he was, the weather conditions were terrible and would not be ideal for someone to skydive in. So even if you were somebody really experienced, there's added danger to jumping during a storm that could have caused some sort of malfunction that could have cost him his life. The other theory is that he pulled it off and went off to live whatever it was his life plan was to live after doing this. And considering how this happened in the early 1970s, if he died of natural causes, it could have been fairly recently during our lifetime that happened. We could have been sharing this earth with D.B. Cooper. We could have been neighbors with D.B. Cooper and not even known. But like I said, the case was never solved. There were never any official suspects that were taken in, and it was officially closed in 2016. Maybe in the future there will be some more evidence that is able to get this case reopened and eventually solved. And finally, just past spooky season, well, just past Halloween, I consider all of the autumn and winter to be part of spooky season. But just following that, we have Get Spooked, the Eastern Airlines Flight 401 haunting. Near the end of the following year, on December 29th, 1972, a Lockheed L1011-1 TriStar, which was Flight 401, which was a regular flight, left out of the JFK Airport in Queens, New York to head to the Miami International Airport. They ended up crashing over the Florida Everglades, and all 3 cockpit crew members, 2 of the 10 flight attendants, and 96 of the 163 passengers were killed. So during the flight, there was some sort of malfunction with a landing gear indicator light. And while the flight crew was preoccupied with that, the captain accidentally bumped the yoke on the aircraft, causing the autopilot to disengage. They started to slowly lose altitude, but by the time they noticed, it was too late and they couldn't save the plane. The 3 cockpit members were Captain Robert Albin Bob Loft, age 55, First Officer Albert John Burt Stockstill, age 39, and Flight Engineer Donald Lewis Don Repo, age 51. They were all extremely experienced pilots. Following the crash, some of the parts from the plane were salvaged and added on to other flights for that same plane type. I don't know if this is normal. I didn't do a ton of research into plane crashes and whether or not they reuse the parts. This seems a little unsafe to me. If I were buying a new car or a used car and they told me that parts of the car were taken from another wrecked version of my car, I wouldn't buy it. But maybe that's a thing that you can do. I mean, I guess people go to junkyards and buy parts out of crashed cars to replace parts in their cars. So maybe this is a thing that's common and I just am not thinking it through thoroughly enough. But either way, after they replaced these parts in the other planes that were still flying, that's when the reports of hauntings started to come in. There were claims that there were disembodied pilots seen on flights and voices that were heard, and this was only on the planes with the salvaged parts. Eastern Airlines officially called the claims quote-unquote garbage, but then they pulled the salvaged parts and the haunting reports stopped. There's a book titled The Ghost of Flight 401 by John G. Fuller, and it was later adapted into a TV movie under the same title and broadcast on NBC in 1978. So this was 6 years after the crash. Eastern Airlines considered suing for libel, but thought that would bring more attention to it and decided to just ignore it. Robert J. Serling's book, From Captain to the Colonel, An Informal History of Eastern Airlines, claims that the parts were never removed from the aircrafts and that no employee ever reported a ghost sighting at all. Just claimed that the whole thing was hogwash. These rumors could stem from a joke that was made by a captain in another emergency landing where, when asked how he got through it, how he successfully landed the plane, he said that he thought Repo's ghost was on the plane. Maybe he was. And if all these claims were just hogwash, who were these ghastly images that were seen on these planes? Who saw them? And is their energy still tied to the plane components? We'll never know if these claims are true or untrue. We'll never know what the people who made these claims saw or why they saw these things. But it's just something to keep in mind if you are going on a flight, or if you are maybe purchasing a new car. There could be components that could have other things tied to them. Now, that is all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please consider engaging with it in some way by hitting subscribe or leaving a comment. I would love to hear what you guys thought of the new, less scripted, more off-the-cuff format. Let me know if you loved it, if you hated it, and please come back for another episode next week. As always, drink your water, take your meds if you need them, and stay spooky.